It started like any other Friday night. I had dinner ready, roasted chicken, wine breathing on the counter, a playlist full of songs that used to mean something. Cole texted at 7, said his marketing meeting was running late. I believed him for the first 20 minutes. After 10 years of marriage, you learn to tell the difference between busy and lying. He'd been saying that word meeting a lot lately. The same word he used 2 months ago when he forgot our anniversary. The same word when he missed my father's memorial. You'd think a man who runs a logistics company would at least be good at managing time. By 8:30, the food was cold, and I was done pretending. I opened Instagram, not because I was suspicious, because I was bored. That's the funny thing about betrayal. It doesn't always sneak up on you. Sometimes you just scroll into it. There it was, a photo of my husband and my best friend, Tessa Ward, taken at a networking event in Seattle. He wore the same navy suit I ironed that morning. She wore the smile I'd seen her practice in every mirror since college. The caption said, "Big night with amazing partners." Yeah, partners all right. For a second, I just stared at it. I wasn't even angry, just numb. I'd been friends with Tessa since we were 20. She stood next to me at my wedding. She cried harder than anyone when we said our vows. And now she was the one he chose to network with. I called him once. No answer. Twice. Straight to voicemail. By the third call, I was calm. That kind of calm people mistake for acceptance. I left the food on the table, blew out the candles, and poured myself a drink instead. When he came home past midnight, he smelled like hotel soap and guilt. He didn't even flinch when I asked, "How was your meeting?" He poured himself another whiskey, sat down, and said, "You stopped being interesting a long time ago, Haley." You'd think I'd cry, scream, throw the glass, something dramatic. But I didn't. I just looked at him and thought, this is what a dead marriage looks like. Two strangers with matching tax returns. He finished his drink, grabbed his phone, and went upstairs like I wasn't standing there watching my entire life collapse in one sentence. That's how simple betrayal is. It doesn't need fireworks. Just a few words and silence to finish the job. Tessa texted me the next morning. "Don't be mad," she wrote. "You and Cole have been distant for years." The kind of message people send when they think morality is negotiable. I didn't answer. I just stared at the screen, realizing the woman who once helped me pick wedding flowers was now explaining why it was fine to sleep with my husband. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted with your entire life, you know the strange stillness that follows. It's not rage, it's clarity. Like your brain finally deletes the fantasy you were living in. I made coffee, packed a small bag, and left the house before Cole woke up. He probably thought I was running errands. In a way, I was. I just wasn't coming back. That morning, I checked into a cheap hotel downtown. I didn't even cry until the receptionist handed me a plastic key card and said, "Enjoy your stay." That's when it hit me. I had no idea where I was supposed to go next. Cole didn't call that day. Or the next. But he did post a photo 2 days later with Tessa, captioned, "New beginnings." I laughed when I saw it. Not because it was funny, but because it was pathetic. Two people who thought betrayal looked like freedom. If you've ever been through something like this, you know that laughter is just grief in disguise. It's what happens when you're too tired to cry but too alive to give up. And here's the thing, betrayal doesn't destroy you all at once. It chips away, quietly, until you stop recognizing the person in the mirror. That night, I looked at myself and thought, maybe this is where I finally start over. But I didn't know that starting over wasn't going to mean moving on, it was going to mean digging deeper, into lies, money, and secrets that went far beyond marriage. Before we keep going, let me ask you something. Have you ever been betrayed by someone who smiled right to your face? If you have, tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if stories like this hit home for you, subscribe to the channel. There's more truth here than most people are ready to admit. Cole once said I'd never rise again. He was wrong. Because the thing about people like him, they never notice the moment you stop breaking and start planning. He thought he had already won. But what he didn't know was that I was just getting started. I didn't go home for 3 days. It's amazing how fast life can shrink to a few plastic bags, a phone charger, and the last clean shirt you have left. When I finally walked through the front door, Cole was packing a suitcase, not for me, of course. He didn't even look surprised. "I think we both need space," he said, like it was some kind of therapy session instead of an eviction notice. He already had a plan. He always did. The man treated marriage like a business deal. When profits drop, he liquidates the asset. Within a week, my credit card stopped working. Our joint account was temporarily frozen for review. I didn't even need to check to know who had made the call. A letter arrived from my employer the next day. "Your access to internal systems has been revoked due to an ethics concern." Translation: someone had accused me of leaking financial data. Someone with access to my laptop. Someone like Cole. I remember standing in the kitchen, holding that letter, feeling the kind of silence that makes you dizzy. I called HR, and they told me, in the voice people reserve for funerals, that my husband had filed the report. He claimed he'd found confidential documents on my computer related to his company, Blue Haven Logistics. The same company I'd helped him build from our dining room table. I laughed out loud. Not because it was funny, but because the absurdity of it all was the only thing keeping me from screaming. My husband cheated on me, ruined my career, and somehow still managed to play the victim. 2 days later, a courier showed up at the door with an envelope from his lawyer. "Provisional separation," it said. Cole wanted to protect assets during this emotional time. Translation: he wanted everything. The house, the cars, even the damn coffee machine I bought on sale. That was the day I stopped trying to understand him. Some men cheat because they're bored. Others because they're insecure. Cole did it because he could. Because he thought I wouldn't fight back. The following week, I went to clear out my office. My keycard didn't work, and security escorted me to a small conference room where my things were packed in a cardboard box. A coworker I barely knew looked away when I passed. People never know what to do when someone else's life is burning down. They just step around the flames. Tessa called that night. I let it go to voicemail, but I listened anyway. "Haley," she said, "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Cole he needed someone." I almost laughed again. Needed someone. Sure, just not the woman who stood next to him for 10 years. That voicemail sat in my phone for weeks. I didn't delete it. It was proof of everything fake about the life I'd built. The next morning, I packed what was left of my clothes into my car. The house wasn't mine anymore. Cole had temporarily changed the locks for safety reasons. When I tried to get in, a neighbor waved awkwardly and said, "I'm sorry, Haley. He told us you were traveling for work." That lie hit harder than any argument ever could. It was clean, effortless, and rehearsed. He'd been rewriting my story in real time, and people were already believing it. I drove until the city lights faded behind me, and stopped at a small motel off the highway. The neon sign flickered like it was barely hanging on. I paid for 1 night, then 2. The woman at the counter didn't even ask for ID after the first week. I tried to find a new job, but every application led to silence. My reputation was shot, my savings nearly gone. Each rejection email felt like a quiet confirmation that Cole had won. He didn't just cheat, he erased me. One night, I checked his company's website out of curiosity. There it was. Tessa's face smiling under the title, Director of Communications. My stomach turned, not because of jealousy, but because it proved how calculated it all was. She wasn't a mistake. She was part of his plan. I closed the laptop and sat there in the dark, realizing the worst part of betrayal isn't what people take from you, it's how they convince you that you deserved it. The motel room smelled like cheap detergent and regret. Every sound, the pipes, the humming fridge, felt like a reminder of how far I'd fallen. Still, something in me refused to disappear quietly. I started keeping notes. Dates, transactions, names, any piece of information I remembered about Cole's business. Not for revenge, at least not yet. It was survival. The more he tried to erase me, the more I needed to document the truth. I printed out the letter from HR, the legal notice, the bank statements. I stored them all in a cheap folder I bought from the gas station. It wasn't much, but it was proof that I existed. Proof that he couldn't just rewrite me out of my own life. One night, while sitting on that creaky motel bed, I whispered out loud, "He's not going to win." It sounded ridiculous at first, talking to myself like some low-budget movie heroine, but it felt good. It felt final. I didn't have a plan yet, but I knew one thing: men like Cole always think they're untouchable, right up until the moment they're not. And as I lay there, staring at the water stain on the ceiling, something shifted. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe it was clarity. But for the first time in months, I didn't feel broken. I felt awake. The next morning, I walked down to the motel office to pay for another week. The clerk handed me a small brown envelope. "It came for you yesterday," she said. It didn't have a return address. Just my name, typed neatly in black ink. I turned it over in my hands, feeling the weight of something unfamiliar, something that didn't belong in this version of my life. Inside was a short letter from a law firm I didn't recognize. It said I had a pending claim to a trust left by a relative. For the first time in a long time, I smiled, not because I believed it, but because life was finally unpredictable again. The envelope sat on the motel nightstand for hours before I opened it. It wasn't fear exactly, just the quiet disbelief that anything good could still happen to me. The letter inside was from a firm called Vaughn and Adler Law Office. The name didn't ring a bell until I read the next line. "We represent the estate of Margaret Vaughn." My aunt. My mother's older sister. She'd passed away 3 years ago, a quiet woman who'd worked as an accountant her whole life. We weren't close. After my mother died, contact faded into the occasional Christmas card. But somehow, she'd left something behind for me, a trust fund release, the letter said, to be collected in person. The irony almost made me laugh. My husband had stripped me of every dollar I'd earned, and now a dead relative was offering to bail me out. It sounded like the kind of twist you only see in bad TV dramas. Still, when you're living in a room with flickering lights and a door that sticks, you don't question opportunity. You take the damn meeting. 2 days later, I stood in front of Vaughn and Adler, a brick building squeezed between a dentist's office and a coffee shop downtown. Inside, it smelled like paper and lemon polish. A receptionist led me to a conference room, where an older man in a gray suit introduced himself as Mr. Adler. He slid a small stack of documents across the table. "Your aunt set up a private trust," he explained. "It was designed to be released only under specific conditions." "What conditions?" I asked. He adjusted his glasses. "The trust activates in the event that you experience a total loss of income or residence. She wanted to make sure you had a safety net." I almost laughed again. Apparently, Aunt Margaret had known me better than I thought. Then he reached under the table and lifted a dusty leather suitcase. "She left this too," he said. "Her instructions were clear: it was to be given only to you, personally, and only if you met the terms of the trust." I stared at it. The handle was worn, the tag still had her initials, M.V. "Do you know what's inside?" He shook his head. "We were told not to open it, but there's $70,000 in cash allocated in the trust, all verified and legally yours. You can withdraw it whenever you choose." Cash. Not stocks. Not checks. Cash. It felt surreal, like the universe had suddenly decided to test whether I could still trust anything real. I thanked him, signed the papers, and carried the suitcase out like it was made of glass. When I got back to the motel, I locked the door, sat on the bed, and stared at it for a long time. There was something about the way it looked, ordinary but deliberate, like it had been waiting. When I finally opened it, the smell of old paper and fabric hit me. Inside, neatly packed, were 12 envelopes labeled by year, a small black USB drive, and one folded letter with my name written in my aunt's handwriting. I unfolded it carefully. "Haley, if you're reading this, you've lost something important. Maybe everything, but don't mistake loss for failure. This money is not for comfort, it's for the truth. Inside the drive, you'll find documents I couldn't share when I was alive. Use them carefully. They connect to people you already know." End of 2. People I already know. That sentence froze me. I plugged the USB into my laptop. The folders were labeled Helios Pharmaceuticals, Internal Review. My aunt had worked there for nearly 20 years before she suddenly retired after a corporate audit. I remembered my mother mentioning something about it once, how Margaret had refused to play along with creative accounting. The files were filled with spreadsheets, expense records, and scanned contracts. One caught my attention immediately, a payment schedule showing Helios transferring money to Blue Haven Logistics, Cole's company. My stomach tightened. The earliest date was 5 years ago. Cole had told me he landed the Helios contract through a friend from college. I believed him. I even helped format the first invoice. But now I was looking at financial records showing repeated transfers, some labeled as consulting fees, others as miscellaneous services. The numbers didn't make sense. They weren't payments for shipping, they were funneling money. In another folder was an email chain between executives at Helios discussing risk management. My aunt's name appeared several times, usually flagged with non-compliance. I clicked the final message, dated 2 weeks before her resignation. Vaughn has raised ethical concerns about third-party payments to Blue Haven Logistics. Recommend termination and settlement agreement. Termination and settlement. That was corporate speak for, we paid her to shut up. I sat back, heart pounding. It wasn't just cheating anymore. It was corruption. Cole wasn't just a liar, he was involved in something illegal, and my aunt had known. For the first time in months, the anger I'd buried started to solidify into something sharper purpose. I spent the next hours printing every file, labeling everything by date. My cheap motel desk looked like a crime board from a detective show. I didn't know exactly what I was building, but I knew it mattered. When I paused to breathe, I noticed something taped to the inside lid of the suitcase, a small yellow sticky note in the same handwriting. It said, "If you find this too late, don't waste time on revenge. Focus on exposure. The truth lasts longer." I stared at those words for a long time. Revenge. Exposure. Truth. It was the first time those words didn't sound abstract. They sounded actionable. That night, I spread the money on the bed. Not to count it, but to remind myself it was real. $70,000. Enough to start over. Enough to fight back. Enough to stop being the victim in my own story. I folded the letter, tucked it into my wallet, and closed the suitcase. The motel felt quieter than usual. Even the traffic outside had faded into background noise. Somewhere between exhaustion and clarity, I realized this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about her, about the woman who tried to warn the world and got buried for it. And as I turned off the light, one thought kept echoing in my head. If my aunt could risk everything for the truth, then maybe it was time I did too. I woke up early, still half unsure if any of it had really happened. The suitcase, the files, the letter, it all felt like something that belonged to a different person's life. But the stack of printouts on the desk was real. So was the cash locked in the motel safe. And so was the quiet voice in my head that kept repeating, "They connect to people you already know." I made instant coffee and stared at the laptop screen, scrolling through the documents again. The contracts between Helios Pharmaceuticals and Blue Haven Logistics weren't random. The amounts were too neat, the timing too deliberate. It was all right there. Fake invoices, duplicate transfers, and falsified shipment logs. Someone had been using Blue Haven to move money off the books. And Cole had signed every page. I checked the digital signatures twice, then found an internal memo naming him as Project Liaison. That was corporate language for the middleman who gets his hands dirty while others stay clean. A part of me still wanted to believe he didn't know. That maybe he was just the puppet, not the puppeteer. But then I remembered the way he'd smirked when he said, "You stopped being interesting." That wasn't the face of a man caught in someone else's game. It was the face of someone who thought he'd already won. I spent the rest of the day reading through my aunt's notes, her meticulous, color-coded annotations that only accountants could make look like art. Each sticky note was a breadcrumb. There were references to adjusted claims, false rebates, and something called Evermark Holdings LLC. I didn't recognize it, but when I searched online, it traced back to a shell company registered in Nevada, one of the classic places people hide dirty money. And under the list of directors, one name jumped out at me like a ghost. Tessa Ward. It was one thing to know she'd taken my husband. It was another to realize she'd helped him steal from federal contracts. I laughed quietly, a low, bitter sound that didn't even feel like mine. Betrayal was starting to look like a group project. I printed the last file and laid it flat on the bed. The numbers told a story even they didn't mean to. Helios had been funneling money through Blue Haven to pay off logistics vendors tied to unapproved drug trials overseas. Someone had been paid to keep those shipments off record. That's why my aunt had been forced out. She'd uncovered it, refused to fake the audit, and walked away with proof. She hadn't been paranoid. She'd been right. By late afternoon, I'd filled a notebook with timelines, names, and payment paths. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to make sense of the bigger picture. My husband's affair wasn't just personal, it was strategic. Tessa wasn't just a lover. She was a partner in crime. I opened the last folder on the USB, labeled Personal. Inside were scanned letters between my aunt and my mother, never sent. One stood out, dated 2 weeks before my mother's death. "I'm worried, Laura. They're trying to cover up the Helios contracts. I think someone connected to the shipments is laundering funds through a smaller logistics partner. I don't know who's behind it yet, but if anything happens to me, promise me you'll tell Haley to stay away from that company." I sat back, staring at the screen. My mother had died in a car accident not long after that letter was written. I'd never thought much of it before it had been raining, and the police said she swerved. But now, everything felt like a pattern I hadn't wanted to see. I closed the laptop and rubbed my eyes. The motel light flickered again, buzzing like it was short on power. Maybe I was too. Still, I knew one thing. I couldn't sit on this information. Whatever this was, it went beyond me. My aunt had risked everything for it. She'd left this trail for a reason, and I wasn't about to let it die in a cheap motel. That night, I called the only person I could think of who wouldn't immediately hang up Daniel Keene. We'd gone to college together. Back then, he was the guy who always sat in the front row, the kind of person who read legal disclaimers for fun. Now, according to LinkedIn, he worked for the SEC's regional office. When he picked up, his voice was the same, measured, steady. "Haley? Wow. It's been years." "Yeah," I said. "Listen, I don't have time for small talk. I think I've got something you'll want to see." There was a pause. "This isn't about your husband, is it? It's about his company, and Helios Pharmaceuticals, and a woman who died trying to expose them." That got his attention. He told me to meet him at a small diner near downtown, somewhere public but quiet. I packed the printed files, my aunt's letter, and the USB into a manila envelope. Then I grabbed the suitcase, not because I needed it, but because it felt wrong to leave it behind. The air outside was cold, the kind that sticks to your skin. I walked past the row of flickering motel signs and thought about all the nights I'd spent in that room thinking I had nothing left. Turns out, I'd been sitting on a buried landmine of truth the whole time. When I got to the diner, Daniel was already there, stirring coffee like he'd been waiting all day. I slid the envelope across the table. "If I'm right," I said, "these files show financial fraud linked to government contracts. And my husband's right in the middle of it." He looked through a few pages, eyebrows tightening. "These look legitimate. Where did you get them?" "From my aunt," I said. "She used to work for Helios. They forced her out. She left me this before she died." Daniel leaned back, tapping his pen. "If this is real, you're sitting on a whistleblower case. You could qualify for federal protection and compensation." "I'm not interested in the money," I said quietly. "I just want the truth to surface." He smiled faintly. "Then you're exactly the kind of person they hate." I didn't know it then, but that conversation would change everything. The waitress came by to refill our cups, and for the first time in months, I felt something that almost resembled calm. Not relief, not victory. Just the sense that maybe, finally, the story was starting to shift in my favor. Daniel met me again 2 days later, this time in his office, a windowless space lined with case files and burnt-out coffee cups. He looked more serious now, flipping through the pages I'd given him like they were dynamite. "You realize what you have here?" he said finally. "These are corporate financial records tied to federal contracts. If even half of this is authentic, Blue Haven Logistics and Helios could both be facing criminal charges." I leaned back, arms crossed. "So, what happens now?" He exhaled, slow and measured. "First, we verify. I'll have our forensics team cross-check these records. If they hold up, we file an internal whistleblower report under Section 21 Farads. But Haley, once you do this, there's no going back. They'll come after you in every way that doesn't leave fingerprints. I smiled faintly. They already did. I'm just evening the score. Daniel didn't laugh, but I saw the corner of his mouth twitch. You always had that stubborn streak, he said. He gave me a burner phone and told me to keep it off unless he called. He also warned me not to contact anyone connected to Blue Haven. Even your old coworkers, he said. Especially them. If they smell what's coming, they'll cover their tracks fast. When I left his office, the world outside felt different. The air sharper. Every billboard, every passing delivery truck reminded me how easily people like Cole hid behind corporations. You never realize how invisible power is until you trace where the money goes. Back at the motel, I organized what I had left into 3 categories: financial records, legal correspondence, and evidence linking Blue Haven to Helios. I'd started with survival. Now it felt like strategy. Cole's voicemail messages had piled up over the last week. I hadn't answered a single one. The most recent one said, "Haley, this thing between us, it got messy. But you can't just vanish. We need to talk." His tone was smooth, calculated, like someone trying to negotiate a ceasefire before the other side realizes they're winning. I deleted it. That night, I searched the internet for public data on Evermark Holdings, the shell company tied to Tessa. It was incorporated under a P.O. box in Reno. 2 board members. One of them was listed as Ward Consulting LLC. Cute. She couldn't even bother hiding her name properly. The deeper I went, the uglier it got. Evermark was moving money between 3 fake vendors under Blue Haven's logistics network, each one with identical invoice templates and routing numbers. It was textbook laundering. But what made it worse was the date. The first transaction happened 1 week after my aunt's forced resignation from Helios. It wasn't random. It was continuation. At one point, I found a scanned email thread labeled Vendor Coordination. One attachment showed Cole's signature next to a Helios executive approving expedited international shipments. The same week, another record showed a payment to Evermark Holdings for consulting services. There it was, the smoking gun. I sat there for a long time, staring at his signature, the same one I'd watched him sign our marriage certificate with. The loops and slants were identical. For years, I'd told myself that the cheating was about ego, lust, boredom. But no, he'd built his entire empire on lies. The affair was just the garnish on a rotten meal. At some point, I must have fallen asleep on the desk. I woke up to the buzz of Daniel's burner phone. His voice came through, quiet but urgent. "We verified everything. The documents are legit. You weren't wrong." My throat tightened. What happens next? "We file it officially. But Haley, I need to be honest. If this goes public, they'll investigate you too. You worked in finance. You were married to him. They'll look for a way to drag you in." "I can handle that," I said. "You think you can, but it's going to get ugly. These people don't panic, they retaliate." I stared at the wall where the motel wallpaper had started to peel. "Then I'll just have to stay quiet longer than they can stay powerful." He paused for a beat. "You sound like her," he said softly. "Who?" "Your aunt. Margaret. She was one of the few who thought silence could be a weapon if you used it right." After we hung up, I opened the laptop again. The cursor blinked in the search bar like it was daring me. I typed Blue Haven Gala Seattle and hit enter. It was all over the news. An upcoming fundraising event for industry leaders, hosted by none other than Cole Monroe. Guest list: corporate executives, Helios representatives, politicians. A celebration of partnership and progress. Endixt. I could almost hear his voice narrating it. The press releases called him a visionary in modern logistics. I called him something else entirely. My first instinct was anger, but it passed quickly. I wasn't in the business of rage anymore. Rage was loud. Rage got you caught. What I needed was precision. If the SEC report was being processed, the investigation would take weeks, maybe months. Cole had time to clean house, shift assets, rewrite history, unless someone accelerated the exposure. I went back to the files my aunt left. There was a contact card tucked inside the final envelope. No name, just a number, and the words, "Press contact. In case of emergency." I recognized the area code it belonged to. The Oregon Tribune, the state paper that once published exposés on corporate fraud. My aunt must have trusted someone there. I hesitated for a long time, finger hovering over the phone. The risk was massive. Whistleblower laws could protect me legally, but not personally. If the story broke before the SEC acted, Cole would know exactly who lit the match. But then I remembered the letter taped inside the suitcase. Don't waste time on revenge. Focus on exposure. She'd been right about everything else. So, I dialed. A woman answered, her voice calm but alert. "Investigation desk." "My name's not important," I said, "but I have documents connecting Helios Pharmaceuticals and Blue Haven Logistics to federal fraud, and I can prove it." She was silent for a second. Then, "Can you send proof?" "I already have it," I said. "You'll get it tomorrow morning." I hung up, heart pounding, and started making copies. Every file, every document, every note. I packaged them in a plain manila envelope, sealed it tight, and wrote one word across the front, "Truth." When the clerk at the motel offered to mail it, I told him I'd drop it off myself. Some things you don't delegate. By the time I walked out, the morning light was just starting to spill over the parking lot. I hadn't slept, but I wasn't tired. There's a strange kind of energy that comes from knowing the lies are finally running out of places to hide. The next morning, I was already sitting in Daniel's office before he got in. The man always looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days, and today was no exception. When he saw my face, he didn't bother with small talk. "You did something, didn't you?" I handed him the shipping receipt. "The Oregon Tribune has everything." He pinched the bridge of his nose. "Jesus, Haley, you just went nuclear." "It was already burning," I said. "I just made sure everyone saw the smoke." He didn't argue with that. Instead, he closed his office blinds and poured 2 cups of black coffee. "Okay," he said. "Then we get ahead of this." Daniel explained how the whistleblower system worked in practice, not in theory. "The SEC doesn't move fast," he said. "They'll review, verify, cross-reference. It's a process. You can't rush bureaucracy, no matter how dirty the money smells." I leaned back in the chair, staring at the framed law degree on his wall. "And while they do all that?" He gave a half smile. "You keep quiet, you stay invisible, and you don't react when things start collapsing. Let them wonder who pulled the string." The confidence in his tone almost made me forget he was talking about my life falling apart for the second time. He pulled out a file from his drawer and laid it flat. "We need to protect you. If your name shows up anywhere in the SEC paperwork, Cole will know it's you. We'll file it under an alias Project Vaughn." Hearing my aunt's name felt right. Like I was finishing what she'd started. Daniel's phone buzzed, and he checked the screen, frowning. That was faster than I expected. The Tribune just published an early headline, "Federal Contracts Under Review, Possible Link to Helios Logistics Fraud." No names yet, but this will spread fast. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. He leaned forward, voice lower. "Haley, I need to be clear. This won't just destroy his company, it'll drag everything connected to him. Friends, partners, maybe even you. Are you ready for that?" "I'm not trying to destroy him," I said. "I'm just taking back what he stole: my name, my reputation, my story." He studied me for a moment and nodded. "Fair enough." Before I left, he handed me a prepaid legal retainer form. "If you get served any kind of notice, civil, criminal, whatever, call me first. Don't answer, don't post online, don't explain. Let me handle it." I left the building and walked to a coffee shop down the street. The air smelled like rain and asphalt, Portland's unofficial perfume. I opened my phone and, for the first time in months, turned on my notifications. The world had moved fast overnight. News outlets were reposting the Tribune article. Financial blogs were speculating about Helios stock manipulation. Blue Haven Logistics had gone dark. Its website offline, its LinkedIn page wiped clean. Cole must have panicked. I checked his number, tempted to call just to hear the crack in his voice, but decided against it. The best sound was silence. Instead, I searched his name. The first headline that popped up was from a local station. Blue Haven CEO refuses comment amid financial investigation. Underneath it was a picture of him walking into his office, eyes down, tie slightly crooked. The same man who once told me I'd never rise again. It was almost poetic. But Daniel was right, things were moving too fast. By evening, my phone rang again. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, but the transcript popped up immediately. Haley, it's Cole. I know what you did. You think this makes you the hero? You're ruining lives. Mine, yours, everyone's. Call me. I deleted it before it finished. There was a time when his voice could have made me pause, maybe even pity him. That time was gone. Later that night, Daniel called. We just got confirmation, he said. The SEC officially opened an inquiry into Blue Haven and Helios. They're freezing accounts linked to the contracts. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. So it's real? It's real, he said. But it's not over. You'll want to stay off the radar for a while. Don't use your credit cards. Don't contact mutual friends. And if anyone asks where you are, you're in Arizona visiting family. I don't have family in Arizona, he chuckled. Exactly. End quote. After we hung up, I sat by the motel window watching the rain streak down the glass. It looked almost pretty, reflecting the neon sign outside. Funny how something can look clean while washing away a mess. I opened my notebook again, the one where I'd written every transaction, every date, every lie. I added one more line at the bottom. Justice moves slower than greed, but it moves. Around midnight, the motel Wi-Fi dropped out. I switched to my phone's data and scrolled through social media. People were already connecting the dots. Isn't Blue Haven run by that guy from the Helios scandal? Didn't his wife used to work in finance? That last one made my stomach tighten. If the internet could find me, so could he. I shut the phone off and packed my things. Not out of fear, out of instinct. Staying too long in one place had never done anyone any good. I didn't know where I'd go next, but I knew I wouldn't be here when the next shoe dropped. Before I left, I placed the empty coffee cup from that morning on the nightstand. It still had my lipstick on the rim. A tiny piece of evidence that I'd existed here. Outside, the rain had slowed to a mist. The city looked half asleep, unaware that by sunrise, its headlines would explode. I passed a newsstand where the first copies of tomorrow's paper were being delivered. The front page read, Whistleblower evidence links Blue Haven logistics to federal fraud. Below it was a photo of Cole, grainy but clear enough to see the panic behind his eyes. The man who once claimed control over everything was finally watching it all slip away. And as I walked into the dark, I realized something simple but undeniable. I hadn't just survived him. I'd outsmarted him. The sound of the rain followed me all the way to the rental apartment I'd found on the east side of the city. It wasn't much bare walls, one window, a mattress on the floor, but it had something my old house never did. Peace. Nobody yelling, nobody lying, just silence that belonged to me. I didn't unpack. The suitcase stayed by the door like a reminder of why I was still standing. That night, I sat cross-legged on the floor with my laptop open, watching the world implode on my screen. Blue Haven Logistics had officially suspended operations pending investigation. The board released a vague statement about compliance reviews. Corporate, speak for panic. Helios stock had already dropped 9%. People were guessing which executive would flip first. Cole's name was trending, and not in the motivational, self-made success way he used to love. His headshot, the same one that once hung in our hallway, was plastered under headlines like, Fraud Scandal Unfolds. Oh. I scrolled until my eyes hurt. There were no tears, no satisfaction, just an eerie calm. This was the part people never tell you about revenge. It doesn't explode, it just settles. My phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. Another voicemail. Haley, this is Tessa. Please, just hear me out. I didn't know it would go this far. Cole's losing it. He says he's going to fix it. I don't know what that means. But I stopped the recording right there. I didn't need to hear excuses from someone who'd been sleeping next to my enemy while cashing his stolen checks. Still, something in her tone felt off. Not guilt fear. Daniel's words echoed in my head. These people don't panic. They retaliate. I double-checked the locks on my door and pushed a chair under the handle. Old habits die fast when survival is your hobby. Then I sat back down, opened my notebook, and began planning. Not the wild kind of plan where you storm into someone's office. The quiet kind. The kind that leaves no fingerprints. First, I documented everything: dates, calls, evidence trails. I saved copies of the Tribune articles and screenshots of the Blue Haven press releases. Every move Cole made now was part of the record. I even logged the time of Tessa's voicemail. It was a habit I'd learned from working in finance. Paper trails don't lie. Around midnight, I got an email from Daniel. The subject line read, "Confidential, stay put." He'd written, "SEC teams have subpoenaed Blue Haven's accounting division. It's moving faster than expected. Don't reach out to anyone. You've already done enough." I stared at the screen and almost laughed. Already done enough. The irony of those words hit hard. Cole used to say the same thing when I asked for fairness in our marriage. "You've already done enough, Haley. Don't overcomplicate things." Now, it was his turn not to overcomplicate things. I powered off the laptop and turned off the lights. The city outside buzzed faintly distant sirens, humming streetlights, a dog barking somewhere far away. The kind of white noise that used to make me restless now sounded like safety. For days, I stayed quiet. Didn't go online, didn't leave a trace. I cooked simple meals, read through my aunt's old letters again, and waited for the next move. Patience became its own kind of weapon. When Daniel finally called, I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. "You did good, Haley. The case is expanding. Turns out Helios executives were bribing Blue Haven employees to falsify reports. There's talk of a criminal indictment. Will they arrest him?" I asked. "Not yet. The feds don't move until they're sure. But they're circling, and he knows it." "Good," I said. "Be careful," he added. "Guys like him, they don't handle losing well. Especially when it's to a woman they underestimated." He wasn't wrong. The next morning, I got proof of that. A white SUV parked across the street from my building. It stayed there for hours, engine idling, windows tinted dark. I recognized the license plate from memory. It was one of the Blue Haven Company cars. I didn't panic. I just picked up my phone and dialed Daniel. "Don't confront them," he said immediately. "Record everything. Keep your blinds closed." I followed his advice. 2 hours later, the SUV was gone. That night, I thought about fear, how it used to control me. Every insult, every argument, every manipulation had been designed to keep me in place. But fear doesn't work once you've already lost everything. What could he possibly take now? The next day, I woke up to a flood of news alerts. Federal agents had raided Blue Haven's headquarters in Seattle. They'd seized servers, frozen assets, and detained several employees for questioning. The article quoted an anonymous insider claiming, "A whistleblower provided key evidence." I smiled. That word whistleblower felt heavier than revenge. It meant I hadn't just destroyed him, I'd exposed him. But the internet being the internet, people wanted blood. Reporters camped outside Blue Haven's offices. Employees leaked gossip. Investors screamed betrayal. It was chaos wrapped in headlines, and all I had to do was sit still and let it play. Daniel called again that evening. "It's official," he said. "The DOJ is stepping in. This is turning into a federal case." I asked, "What happens to me now?" "Nothing if you stay quiet. You'll probably get contacted as a witness, maybe even receive compensation once it's over. But for now, Haley, your best move is stillness. Don't celebrate. Don't explain. Just disappear a little longer." Disappear. It was ironic how liberating that word sounded. I thanked him, hung up, and stood by the window, watching the city fade into twilight. The SUV didn't come back. The streetlights flickered on, washing everything in that pale orange glow that makes things look cleaner than they really are. For the first time in years, I felt completely still, not because I was trapped, but because I was finally untouchable. I poured myself a glass of wine, turned on some quiet jazz, and sat at the small kitchen table. Across from me was the suitcase, still resting where I'd left it, like an old ally that never needed praise. The note inside echoed in my mind again. This money is for the truth. I looked around the small apartment bare, quiet, alive, and realized maybe that's exactly what I'd bought. Not revenge, not power, just truth. And it was worth every penny. The night the headlines turned from speculation to confirmation, I was cooking pasta in my tiny kitchen. The TV in the background hummed with the evening news. I wasn't really listening until I heard his name. Blue Haven Logistics CEO Cole Monroe has been arrested in connection with federal fraud and obstruction of justice, the anchor said. Authorities confirmed that new evidence surfaced linking Monroe to bribery and offshore accounts tied to Helios Pharmaceuticals. The spoon slipped from my hand and clattered against the floor. I stood there, frozen, while the reporter kept talking. They showed footage of Cole in handcuffs, his perfect suit rumpled, his face pale under the flash of cameras. For a moment, I barely recognized him. That man on the screen looked small. The broadcast continued. Sources say an anonymous whistleblower provided crucial evidence. The Department of Justice is expected to press charges within the week. Anonymous. That word was doing its job well. I muted the TV, sat at the kitchen table, and just listened to the quiet. For the first time since this all started, I didn't feel adrenaline or fear, just a strange, deep calm. The kind that comes after a storm you never thought would end. But peace doesn't come free. My phone was already buzzing. Reporters, old coworkers, numbers I didn't recognize. I turned it off and poured myself a drink. 5 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. Not loud, just steady. 3 knocks. Pause. Then 2 more. I hesitated, then peeked through the peephole. A woman stood there, wearing a long beige coat and holding a folder. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Haley Monroe?" she asked when I cracked the door open. "Who's asking?" She showed me a badge. "Special Agent Ramos, Department of Justice. May I come in?" The air in my lungs went thin. Still, I opened the door. She stepped inside, scanned the room, then gestured to the folder. "You don't have to worry, we're not here to arrest you. Quite the opposite, actually. You helped us more than you realize." "I didn't do it for you," I said, before I could stop myself. She smiled slightly. "Most people don't." Ramos explained that the evidence Daniel and I had compiled had been instrumental in opening the case. The Tribune articles had drawn attention, but the documents sealed the deal. "You gave us something we couldn't ignore," she said. "And in this business, that's rare." I nodded, unsure what to say. "There's one more thing," she added. "We've recovered financial accounts connected to your name. Some of the money Helios funneled through Blue Haven was traced back to joint assets you shared with Mr. Monroe. You're technically entitled to half." I blinked. "Half of what?" She flipped through the folder. "Roughly $320,000. For a second, I thought I misheard her. "That money isn't clean," I said. "Neither is what they did to you," Ramos replied. "But it's legal. The accounts will be liquidated, and your share will be released once the court finalizes the asset division. Consider it restitution." Restitution. What an elegant word for compensation that doesn't heal anything. After she left, I sat there staring at my hands. $320,000. That was more than Cole had ever let me touch when we were married. He once told me, "I handle the real money, Haley. You just manage the house." End quote. Now the house was gone, but somehow the money found its way back. The next day, I went to Daniel's office with the news. He already knew. "The DOJ called me this morning," he said. "They want to interview you officially as a protected witness. You'll be safe. You did the right thing." "Funny," I said, "because it doesn't feel like victory." He nodded, folding his hands. "It never does. Justice isn't satisfying. It's just final." That line stayed with me. Later that afternoon, as I walked home, I passed by a newsstand. The front page showed Cole again being led into a courthouse, jaw clenched, eyes hard. The caption read, "From power to prison, the fall of Blue Haven." Behind him, just out of focus, was Tessa, shielding her face from the cameras. I bought the paper and carried it home like a relic. When I reached my apartment, I placed it on the counter, beside the open suitcase that had started all of this. The edges of the letter from Aunt Margaret were worn now, but the ink was still clear. This money is for the truth. I unfolded it, reading it again slowly. She must have known what was buried in those files. She must have known it would destroy people. But maybe she also knew it would save me. The pasta from last night was still in the pot, untouched. I threw it out and boiled a new batch. The smell of garlic filled the small space, and for the first time, it didn't remind me of dinners that ended in silence or fake smiles. It just smelled like home. When I sat down to eat, I turned the TV back on not for the news, just for background noise. Some late-night talk show was cracking jokes about another corporate exec in handcuffs. The audience laughed, loud and carefree. I didn't laugh, but I smiled. Revenge wasn't about laughter. It was about quiet correction. About the universe finally tipping the scales back to balance, even if no one clapped for it. The next morning, I woke to sunlight pouring through the window. I checked my phone, no messages, no calls, just stillness. I brewed coffee, opened my laptop, and typed a short email to Daniel. Thank you. For everything. If the DOJ needs me, they know where to find me. But for now, I think I've finally found enough peace to stop chasing justice. Before I could overthink it, I hit send. Then I closed the laptop. Outside, the world kept moving. But inside, for once, it felt like time had stopped in exactly the right place. 2 months passed before I realized I hadn't checked the news in days. The world had moved on to newer scandals and louder dramas. Cole Monroe had officially pled guilty to financial fraud and obstruction. His plea deal reduced his sentence to 8 years, but the damage was permanent. Blue Haven was dissolved. Helios was under new management. Their names became just another corporate cautionary tale. I didn't celebrate. I didn't need to. Some stories don't end with applause. They end with silence that finally feels deserved. I'd moved again, this time to a small coastal town in Oregon called Newport. The kind of place where no one cares who you used to be, as long as you show up on time and pay for your coffee. I rented a modest apartment above a bookstore and started consulting part-time for small businesses that needed help untangling their finances. Nothing fancy, just honest work. Most mornings started the same way. Strong coffee, ocean air through the window, and the sound of gulls arguing over breakfast scraps. I liked that routine. It reminded me that peace doesn't have to be dramatic. It just has to be real. One afternoon, while organizing some old papers, I came across the last unopened envelope from Aunt Margaret's suitcase. I'd almost forgotten about it. The handwriting on the front was hers. Only open when you're free. I sat down, hands trembling a little, and peeled it open. Inside was a single page typed, not handwritten. Haley, if you're reading this, it means you finally learned what freedom costs and why it's worth it. I didn't leave you money to make you rich. I left it to make you dangerous to the kind of men who think they can buy silence. Use it wisely. Use it quietly. And when it's over, rebuild something good. That's the only kind of revenge that lasts. Margaret. I read it twice, then folded it back carefully. For a moment, I just sat there staring out the window at the gray horizon. She'd known everything. She'd planned this years before I even understood what betrayal felt like. I thought about how much time I'd spent chasing closure-proof, justice, punishment. But what she'd really left me wasn't money or vengeance. It was clarity. Later that week, Daniel called for the first time in months. His voice was lighter than I remembered. "You off the grid for good?" he asked. "Mostly," I said. "Just helping small businesses. Nothing exciting." "That's how real rebuilding starts," he said. "Oh, and you'll be getting something in the mail soon." The court finalized the asset restitution. "You're officially clear and compensated." I thanked him, and he paused before hanging up. "You know," he said, "I've worked a lot of cases, but very few end the way yours did. You didn't destroy him, you exposed him. There's a difference." When the check arrived a few days later, I didn't rush to deposit it. It sat on the counter for 2 days, untouched. $320,000. Clean money now. Legal, official, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like permission. That night, I made a decision. I used part of that money to register a nonprofit foundation, the Vaughn Fund for Financial Recovery. Named after my aunt, It offered free consulting and small grants for women trying to rebuild after financial abuse or betrayal. Nothing flashy, just something that mattered. The first workshop I hosted was in the bookstore downstairs. 6 women showed up, all different ages and backgrounds. Some had been cheated on. Some had been scammed. All of them were trying to start over. I told them, the truth doesn't destroy you. It just makes you rebuild on solid ground. They listened. They nodded. One woman cried. When the session ended, I stayed behind to clean up the coffee cups. The owner of the bookstore, a retired teacher named June, handed me a mug and said, "You talk like someone who's lived it." I smiled. "I have." She nodded, like she understood, without needing the details. "Then you'll be good at this." That night, after everyone left, I sat in the empty store with the lights dimmed and the sound of rain on the roof. The town was quiet. My life was quiet. And for the first time, that quiet didn't feel like absence, it felt like home. I took out my phone and opened a draft message I'd been writing for weeks. Not to Cole. Not to Tessa. Just a message to myself. You didn't lose everything. You lost the illusion that you needed them. And that's what made you free. I saved it and closed the phone. The next morning, the sun finally broke through the coastal fog. Light spilled through the bookstore window, landing on the corner where I'd set Aunt Margaret's suitcase. I'd kept it as a reminder not of pain, but of direction. It was strange how something that once symbolized loss now looked like a beginning. When the first customer came in that day, she smiled at me and said, "You run that finance class, right? My sister said you helped her figure out her business loan." I nodded. "That's me." "Well," she said, "you're doing good work. People talk." After she left, I looked around the small shop rows of old books, sunlight cutting across the counter, the sound of the ocean outside, and realized I had everything I needed. I wasn't the woman who'd been betrayed. I wasn't the whistleblower. I wasn't even the ex-wife of a headline scandal. I was just Haley Monroe, who'd rebuilt something good out of the wreckage. Before opening the register, I whispered to the empty room, "You were right, Aunt Margaret. The only revenge that lasts is rebuilding." The bell above the door chimed again as another customer walked in. I smiled and said, "Good morning," like any normal person starting another ordinary, peaceful day. And for the first time in years, it truly was. It was late spring when I finally visited the ocean at sunrise. Newport was half asleep, the sky still painted with that pale gold light that made everything look softer than it was. I carried a thermos of coffee and walked down to the shore, barefoot, feeling the cold sand under my feet. The wind was sharp but clean, the kind of air that wakes up the parts of you that grief can't kill. For a while, I just stood there, listening to the waves hit the rocks, trying to remember the last time I'd felt something close to peace. It had been years, maybe longer. When I sat down on a piece of driftwood, I pulled out a small envelope I'd brought with me. Inside were the last few things that tied me to that old life: a copy of my marriage certificate, a photo from our anniversary dinner, and one of the headlines with Cole's mugshot. I'd kept them not out of sentiment, but as proof. Proof that it had all happened, and proof that I'd survived it. I held the photo for a long moment. In it, he was smiling, wine glass raised, looking like the man I used to believe in. I almost didn't recognize myself. Sitting next to him, eyes dim, smile rehearsed. That version of me had believed loyalty was strength, and silence was love. I tossed the photo into the sand and watched the wind pick it up, carry it a few feet, then drop it face down. Appropriate. Behind me, a couple of joggers passed, laughing about something simple and human: weekend plans, maybe a dog. I smiled faintly. It felt good to hear laughter again that didn't belong to people pretending. Later that day, I opened the small office space I'd just leased for the Vaughn Fund. The sign wasn't fancy, just my aunt's name etched in simple black letters above the door. I spent the morning hanging photos of women we'd helped: a bakery owner from Salem, a nurse from Eugene, a single mother from Portland who'd rebuilt her credit after a messy divorce. Real stories. Real survivors. I didn't post about it online or make any grand announcement. I'd had enough of noise and performance. Everything about this new life was quiet by design. Quiet, but steady. Around noon, Daniel stopped by. He looked the same: rumpled suit, dry humor, the faint smell of burnt coffee. He handed me a small folder. "You're officially registered as a 501c3, he said. "Congratulations, Miss Founder." I laughed. "You're the only lawyer I know who sounds allergic to good news." He grinned. "It's a defense mechanism. Keeps me from caring too much." Then, his expression softened. "I read about Cole's sentencing. You never asked for the full details." "I didn't need them." "Well, you're getting them anyway." He placed the folder on my desk. 8 years. No parole for the first 4. Tessa testified against him. She's got a plea deal, 2 years probation, restitution payments. She'll be fine. I nodded. Good. She was never built for the kind of war he started. Daniel paused. "And you were?" "Eventually," I said. "But I wouldn't recommend it." He laughed quietly and slipped his hands into his pockets. "You know, you could have taken the easy route. Settled, disappeared, started over under another name. Instead, you fought it through." Maybe I needed to prove to myself that I wasn't what he said I was. And what was that? I looked at the sunlight spilling across the floor, the same way it had the morning after I'd left him. "A liability," I said. "Turns out I was the audit." He smiled at that. "That should go on your office wall." After he left, I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the desk. The sound of the ocean carried through the open window. I thought about Aunt Margaret again, about how she must have known that peace doesn't come from forgiveness, it comes from precision, knowing where to draw the line and never crossing it again. In the afternoon, a delivery arrived. No sender listed, just a small box tied with a thin white ribbon. I opened it carefully. Inside was a gold pen and a note written in familiar handwriting. "You used to sign things for other people's futures. Now sign for your own. D." End of quote. I laughed softly and set the pen beside the framed letter from my aunt. The 2 messages looked perfect together. One from the woman who gave me courage, one from the man who helped me use it. That night, I walked back to the beach. The tide was low, the air warm enough to make me linger. I brought the last piece of paper from the envelope, the marriage certificate. It wasn't anger that made me tear it in half. It was relief. The sound of the paper ripping was small but final. I dropped the pieces into the water and watched them drift away under the faint moonlight. They sank slowly, no drama, no ceremony, just gone. Somewhere behind me, a group of teenagers were lighting sparklers, their laughter echoing through the dark. The glow flickered across the sand, catching in the salt air like fireflies. It looked like life starting over, unbothered and unafraid. I stayed until the horizon faded into night. When I finally turned to leave, I whispered not to anyone, not to the ocean, just to the wind. "It's over." No tears, no shaking hands, just calm. Back home, I poured a glass of wine and sat by the window, listening to the distant hum of the waves. The world outside was dark, but my little apartment glowed with that soft golden light I used to envy in other people's lives. For years, I'd thought survival meant staying invisible. Now I understood. Real survival is living without fear of being seen. I glanced at the folder Daniel had left and smiled at the words embossed on the front, "The Vaughn Fund for Financial Recovery." The truth had destroyed a company, ended a marriage, and saved a woman who thought she had nothing left. Maybe that was the real fortune Aunt Margaret meant all along. Not the $70,000, but the clarity to rebuild everything they tried to take. The waves crashed in the distance, steady and rhythmic. I raised my glass toward the sound and said quietly, "Here's to truth. The kind that doesn't shout, just stands." Then I drank, and for the first time in my life, it tasted like freedom. A few weeks later, I was invited to speak at a small community event for women rebuilding after financial loss. It wasn't anything fancy, just a library conference room with folding chairs, coffee and paper cups, and that soft buzz of people who'd survived enough to stop pretending. They introduced me as Haley Monroe, founder of the Vaughn Fund. The title still felt strange. I didn't think of myself as a founder, just someone who learned the hard way what silence can cost. When I stood up to speak, I didn't bring notes. I didn't rehearse. I just told the truth. "I used to think betrayal was the end of something," I said. "That once someone breaks you, there's nothing left worth saving. But I was wrong. Betrayal doesn't end you. It just shows you who you were before you forgot yourself. The room stayed quiet. Some nodded. Some stared straight ahead, holding their own memories tight. I lost everything I thought defined me, I continued. My marriage, my job, my reputation. But I realized those things weren't my identity. They were just the mirrors I used to measure my worth. And mirrors can lie. A woman in the front row whispered, "Amen," barely loud enough for anyone to hear. I smiled and said, "Revenge stories always sound like fire and chaos, but in real life, the best revenge doesn't burn anything. It rebuilds. Quietly, patiently, one small truth at a time." When it ended, no one clapped right away. Then, slowly, they did, not loud, not performative, just real. That kind of applause that means, "I've been there too." Afterward, a young woman approached me. She looked barely 30, clutching a folder like it was her last lifeline. "My husband left me last year," she said, voice trembling. "Took our savings. I thought I'd never recover, but hearing you, I think maybe I can." I put a hand on her shoulder. "You can," I said. "Just remember, truth doesn't fix everything, but it frees you to start over, and that's enough." When she left, I sat down for a moment, letting the noise fade. I thought about how far I'd come from a motel room filled with lies to this quiet room filled with survivors. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like grace. Later that evening, as the sun set over the town, I drove to the cliffs overlooking the ocean. It had become my ritual, after every workshop, a way to breathe before the world got loud again. The sky was streaked with pink and gold, the waves below catching the last bits of light. I parked, stepped out, and walked to the edge where the wind was strongest. In my pocket, I carried something small, a gold bracelet engraved with the initials H+C. I'd found it in an old jewelry box weeks earlier. It didn't hurt anymore to look at it, it just didn't belong to my story now. I unclasped it, let it fall into my palm, and said quietly, "Goodbye." Then I threw it into the sea. The bracelet caught the light for a second, before disappearing into the water. I watched until the ripples faded. It wasn't symbolic or dramatic. It was just done. When I turned back toward the car, I felt lighter, not like someone escaping, but like someone returning. On the drive home, I passed through the same stretch of highway where Cole and I used to fight over trivial things, music, directions, silence. It was strange how different it looked now. The same trees, same road, but it no longer carried any weight, just space. Back in Newport, the bookstore downstairs was closing for the night. June waved from the counter. "How'd the event go?" "Better than I expected," I said. "They listened. That's all anyone really needs, isn't it? To be heard?" I nodded. "And believed." She smiled. "You sound like someone who finally believes herself." That line stayed with me long after I climbed the stairs to my apartment. Inside, the light from the street lamps painted soft patterns on the wall. The room smelled faintly of salt air and fresh paper, two things I'd come to associate with peace. I made tea, sat by the window, and opened my notebook. At the top of the page, I wrote, Lesson 1. Silence is not weakness, it's strategy. Lesson 2. Revenge isn't about destruction, it's about restoration. Lesson 3. The truth doesn't shout, it stands. Underneath, I added one more line, smaller than the rest. The hardest boundaries we set are the ones that set us free. I closed the notebook and leaned back in the chair. Outside, the ocean murmured like it always did, steady and indifferent. But tonight, it didn't sound lonely. It sounded alive. I thought about Aunt Margaret again, how she'd known all along that the money was never the point. She'd seen something in me I hadn't yet recognized. The ability to survive without bitterness. To fight clean. To win quietly. I took a deep breath and whispered, "Thank you," though I wasn't sure who I was thanking anymore, her, Daniel, or the version of myself that never gave up. Maybe all of them. My phone buzzed once on the table, a message from Daniel. "You did good today. Margaret would be proud." I smiled and turned the phone face down. The clock ticked softly in the background. Somewhere outside, a seagull cried, then faded into the wind. I finished my tea and turned off the lamp. The room went dark, except for the glow of the moon spilling through the window, landing right on the open suitcase where I'd first found the letter. It was empty now, but I kept it anyway. Not as a symbol of pain, but as proof that endings can be clean, quiet, and final. I lay back in bed, listening to the waves. The world outside kept moving, but for the first time, I didn't feel the need to chase it. Peace didn't look like a finish line after all. It looked like this stillness, breath, and truth. And somewhere between the hum of the ocean and the rhythm of my heartbeat, I realized the story had never been about betrayal. It had always been about freedom. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel, share it, leave a comment, and tell me where you're watching from. I read every story, every word, because every truth deserves to be heard.